Hello and welcome once again to the Liberty Ginger Podcast. I am your host, Mike Ursery, and you are listening to episode number 9. Liberty Ginger Podcast is part of the Think Liberty Network. You can find the Think Liberty Network at most places where podcasts are hosted, to include Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and iHeartRadio. So, did you all catch that Thursday night NFL football game between the Los Angeles Chargers and the Kansas City Chiefs? I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I am from San Diego originally. I grew up a San Diego sports fan. I'm a avid fan of the San Diego Padres. I was a Charger fan, but they have moved on to Los Angeles, so my feelings about them ever since they moved, not just that they moved, but in the way that they went about it, I'm really not going to go on about that here. I'm really not so much of a Charger fan anymore. I do still support Phillip Rivers. I'm kind of in a awkward situation here. I still consider Phillip Rivers my quarterback, but he's playing for a team that I don't really care so much about anymore. And I know that I'm not the only Phillip Rivers fan who feels this way. But about that game, the Chargers played at Kansas City at Arrowhead Stadium, and they somehow escaped with a win, that was a really intense game. And it really started to get really intense in the fourth quarter. The Chargers were down by 14 points. They score a touchdown, cut the lead down to 7. They get the ball back, go all the way down the field. Well, they really only go about 60 yards, but still, they went down the field, scored a touchdown, went for 2 with 4 seconds left in the game. And Mike Williams, I don't know how he was so wide open, but Mike Williams, the difference maker in that game, was wide open to catch the pass from Rivers. And the Chargers won 29-28. There are 2 takeaways from that game that I'll talk about here real quick. Now, I'm not here to talk about the NFL on this podcast, but still, I really wanted to talk about that game. That game was really, really good. One of the better NFL games I've seen this season. And given the way the NFL has been the past few years, it's one of the better NFL games I've seen in a long time, especially in the AFC. But there are 2 takeaways here, one that is typical and one that is in no way typical at all. First, the one that is in no way typical at all. The Chargers somehow managed to come back and win a big game. Usually the Chargers are on the losing end of those games. And being a Charger fan for as long as I was, I can tell you that firsthand. Yes, there are many big games the Chargers have been in, some that they were completely unprepared for and they got blown out, or some where they just lost by a really narrow margin. And it was always something at the end that caused them to lose, a turnover or whatever it was. They were always on the losing end. But not last night. And it's kind of painful to see them as the Los Angeles Chargers winning that the way they did, because they're not San Diego anymore. Now they're LA. What's even more sad is that there really wasn't anyone in LA who seemed to care. They play in the StubHub Center. They can't fill that stadium. That stadium holds like 27,000 people. They can't fill it. And there are always more opposing fans in that stadium when the Chargers play there than there are Charger fans. So, yeah, that's a really, really big win for that franchise, but there aren't many people who are going to be celebrating that with them. The other takeaway that is quite typical, the Chiefs, this Andy-Reid-led football team, is now looking like they are in playoff form. That game was a playoff atmosphere. The Chiefs are still in first place in the AFC West. The Chargers have tied them. They both have the same record, 11-3, but the Chiefs hold the tiebreaker right now, so if they were to finish with the same record, the Chiefs win that division. But really big game, playoff atmosphere at Arrowhead, national television, and the Chiefs somehow found a way to lose that game. Typical Andy Reid fashion. And if you're listening to this and you're a Chiefs fan, or you're an Andy Reid fan, or a Patrick Mahomes fan, or whatever you are, you probably don't like hearing this, but deep down you have to know that this is true. This happens so many times. It happened when Andy Reid was in Philadelphia, and it's happening now when Andy Reid is in Kansas City. So many times he has found a way to lose that game, to lose that big game. And it's always because he plays not to lose towards the end. 2-score lead in the fourth quarter, and he's playing not to lose. We've seen that so many times with Andy Reid. But enough about the NFL. This is not a sports podcast. This is a news podcast. So let's talk about some of the news over the past week. This past week, we've seen some egregious examples of government overstepping its own boundaries. We talk all the time about government overreach at the federal level. Well, this week, we've seen some heinous displays of government intrusion at the state level. One of these examples, and in no way is it shocking at all, takes place in California. The state has proposed taxing California residents for sending text messages. Yes, text messages. The tax would be used to provide phone service for low-income residents. Another example is happening in New York. The state's newly elected attorney general has made it her priority to not only investigate President Trump, but also his family and anyone else involved with his business dealings in the state. This was one of her campaign promises. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. And now it appears that she is going to follow through with it. But is she doing this because it's the right thing to do? Is she investigating Donald Trump, his family, and everyone else associated with him with all of his business dealings because maybe he did something wrong and it's the right thing to do? Or is she doing it because Donald Trump is a political opponent? She's a Democrat. I'm not trying to sound partisan here. I'm not a Republican. But is this because this is politically premeditated? And if this is politically premeditated, what kind of precedent is this going to set not only in New York, but in other states as well? We'll talk about that here in a little also. And one more example that's also taking place in New York. It's kind of old, but I haven't ever talked about it yet. I think this would be a good time to talk about it here, is the proposal to change gun legislation in the state of New York to change the background check process, which would include going through a gun purchaser's social media, also going through up to 3 years of internet history. We will talk about that as well. First, we'll go over this text tax that's taking place in California. Do you remember, well, if you're old enough, do you remember about 10 years ago having a cell phone and your bill would reflect the number of text messages you sent and there was a fee for sending a text? It's not that way anymore because now texting is unlimited, but there was a time where texting would be an additional 5 cents per text, whether you sent it or received it. They might have had an allotted amount of text that you could send for free before they started charging you. But after that, they started to charge you for text messages. I can remember hearing people complain when they would receive a text from someone else because they would say that that was going to be an additional charge on their phone bill at the end of the month. Well, those days are over with now. Texting is unlimited. Texting is free. It does not cost anything. And not only that, but texting has become a more preferred form of communication than actually talking to people on the phone. Instead of talking on the phone, people would choose to rather text each other or message each other through some kind of messaging app. Forbes had pointed out some of the reasons why texting is preferred back in May 2017. And one of the reasons they laid out is that texting is convenient. You can check text messages whenever, and it's a way of communicating on your time. We live in a world now where time is so important. Time is money, and people want to be able to communicate and really do everything on their own time. Another reason why it's preferred, according to Forbes, is that it's a convenient form of mass communication. You can send a text to multiple parties. It's not just to one person. You can send them out to multiple people at one time. It's a lot like setting up a conference call, except you're not going through the trouble of setting up the conference call. Instead, you can just write out a text, and then it goes to everyone that it's intended for. And unlike having a spoken conversation with someone else, text messages can be thought out before they're sent. They're not reactionary. Like if you're talking to someone face-to-face, you're reacting to things that the other person says. People are reacting to each other. Well, with a text message, it's not like that. Like if you're talking to someone face-to-face, you're not going to be able to just sit there and take a while and think about what you want to say before you say it, because that's not how people speak to each other. No, but with a text message, you can take some time, think about what you want to say, type it out, read it over, and then either send it, or if you want to make some changes to it, you can do that as well. That's another reason why people prefer texting to actually talking to someone else. Another benefit with texting is that it's great for emergencies. The emergency broadcasting system uses text. They'll send alerts straight to people's phones for weather alerts, Amber alerts. Do you remember the presidential alert that went to everyone's phone back during the summer? By the way, I loved all the complaining that people did about that when it happened. All these people talking about how they thought an actual disaster was happening whenever that presidential test alert went out. Look, they said days in advance that everyone was going to get an alert on their phone on that day, and it was going to be from the President of the United States. People knew in advance, but people still wanted to be really dramatic about it because we live in a time now where people just love being dramatic about so many things. Well, California wants to take advantage of their citizens' love for texting in an effort to make phone service more affordable, more accessible for low-income residents. They want to place a tax on text messages. Yes, California has found yet another way of squeezing money out of their citizens. The question has been asked so many times, and I think the answer is that there really is no end to California's madness. The state actually wants to tax people for communicating. I wrote about this for Being Libertarian, and you can find it on beinglibertarian.com. The article is entitled, "Texting Tax to be Implemented? Really, California?" That was the response from a lot of people after hearing about this, myself included. Really, California? Really? And California says, yes, really. They want to impose a tax on everyone who uses a cell phone for the text they send. This would be another tax that people in California would be required to pay. They already have the highest state sales tax in the nation, 7.25%. Combine that with the local sales tax in some California cities, and it can be as high as 10%. They have imposed a tax on tobacco. A pack of cigarettes, for example, would cost an extra $2.87. Might as well just quit. Their fuel tax is a little over 53 cents per gallon. The cost of fuel in California is much higher than the national average. One thing I find interesting is a tax they have imposed on fruit. If you buy fruit from a vending machine, you're paying a 33% tax on it. However, if you buy that same fruit from a grocery store, it's tax-free. That makes no sense. And now, if this proposal goes through, the people of California will have to pay yet another tax. The Mercury News, a newspaper based in San Jose, California, did a story about it this week. And they mentioned the California Public Utilities Commission, who said that their public purpose program budget has risen from 2011 to 2017 from $670 million to $998 million over that same time span. The telecommunications industry revenues that fund the program have dropped from $16.5 billion to $11.3 billion. So their reasoning here is that their source of revenue that funds this program, well, that source of revenue is dwindling, so they have to resort to another means to satisfy the budget for this program that provides phone access to low-income residents. The Mercury News said that while state regulators have been ginning up a scheme to charge a fee for texting, opponents of the proposal, like the wireless industry and other business groups, are working to defeat the proposal. Jim Wunderman, president of the Bay Area Council, told the Mercury News that the proposal is a dumb idea. Yeah. Adding that texting is how conversations take place in this day and age, and putting a tax on texting would be the same as putting a tax on conversations. Also true. Imagine if you were required to pay more money just for being social. For performing a basic and necessary human function, being social, you would be taxed. That is just insane to me. No details other than the tax itself have really been laid out. So it's really not clear about how this would be implemented. It's not clear about how much each person would have to pay. But reading over all the information about this, it doesn't seem like everyone would have to pay a tax per text, just like that fee per text 10 years ago. But it seems more like there would be a surcharge added onto everyone's phone bill. But still, why? The Mercury News also said that business groups in California, to include the Bay Area Council, the California Chamber of Commerce, and the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, have calculated that new charges could amount to $44.5 million per year. But wait, there's more. California could put a tax on text messages already sent going as far back as 5 years ago, meaning that the charges could amount to more than $220 million for California consumers. So you're going to tax people for something they already did? I don't think that's done anywhere. But now California wants to do it. They want to go back 5 years and tax people for something they already did just because the state needs money. That is insane. But then again, it's California. This proposal, it seems, is being taken to court. The CTIA, which is a trade association that represents the wireless industry in the U.S., the Mercury News said that the CTIA said in legal filings that texting is an information service, like email, and not a telecommunications service. Therefore, texting isn't subject to the authority of the California Public Utilities Commission. The wireless industry has also argued that the surcharge would put wireless companies at a disadvantage with competing messaging services like Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, Apple's iMessage, Skype. There are a lot of other ways besides having a cell phone service to send a message to someone. You don't need a cell phone plan. All you need is an electronic device and an internet signal. So if you have, say if you're somewhere where you have a Wi-Fi signal, you could send messages to people, and you don't need a cell phone plan to do that. According to the CTIA, those messaging services account for almost triple the volume of text messages sent through wireless carriers. Text messages sent through wireless carriers amounted to more than 3 trillion this year alone. So, in an effort to provide phone service for low-income residents, the state of California is willing to put the wireless industry, from whom they rely on for revenue to fund this program, at risk. They're willing to squeeze even more money out of their own citizens to make it possible. This is another example of government squeezing money from the private sector to fund its own programs. I really hope, for the sake of the people who live in that state and for the wireless industry, this does not go through. Elsewhere, the state of New York has a new attorney general who will assume her office at the start of the new year. Her name is Letitia James. She is the first African American to be elected to the position in New York. She's a Democrat, and her first major initiative is to thoroughly investigate the business dealings of President Donald Trump, according to several news reports. She made this one of her campaign promises. She won her election, and now she intends to follow through with it. Trump's opponents in the government and in the media have gone on night and day, and they really have done this. They have gone on night and day about his business dealings, about his charity, the Trump Foundation, about his relationship with Russia. After the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, they started going on about, not just the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, but his very weak response to it. They started going on about his relationship and his business dealings with Saudi Arabia. According to Fortune, James told NBC she plans to continue investigations into the Trump Foundation along with a number of other points of contention, including Trump's New York real estate holdings, the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting with a Russian official, government subsidies Trump may have received, and whether or not his New York businesses violate the emoluments clause in the U.S. Constitution. Since both the Trump Foundation and Trump's presidential campaigns are centered in New York, James will have ample jurisdiction to take on potential law violations. She's included former U.S. Attorney General Loretta-Lynch, neat, as part of her transition team in order to bring in the proper experts, NBC reports. I have concerns with respect to the possibility that this administration might pardon some individuals who might face some criminal charges, but I do not want them to be immune from state charges, James had told NBC. And what she's talking about there is she's talking about Trump issuing pardons if anyone is convicted in any of the investigations taking place. As of right now, she wouldn't be able to convict anyone on state charges if they are pardoned because of New York's double jeopardy law. But she's seeking a way around that. A bill has been introduced in New York that would change its double jeopardy laws. She also campaigned on this bill passing and even said she's confident that it would pass within her first 100 days. I have questions about this. And one of those questions is that when you look at Democrats at the federal level, like, for example, Democrats who now, well, not now, but in January, they will have the majority in the House of Representatives and they will have the ability to impeach. They are talking about investigating the president and wanting to know if there's anything that is grounds for impeachment. So with that, now you have this Democrat who is the new attorney general in New York, and she's talking about investigating President Trump. My first question is this politically premeditated? Again, I'm not trying to sound partisan here because I'm not a Republican. But is she doing this because she legitimately thinks it is the right thing to do and it is her duty as the attorney general to do this? Or is she doing this because it's Donald Trump? And not only that, but she is counting on state laws being changed so that she can do all the things that she wants to do. And none of these things, like his business dealings or his relationships with anyone, ever came into question until after he was elected president. Before this, he was just a New York playboy billionaire. He was very prominent in the public eye, but he was never thought of nothing more than a billionaire real estate mogul. He was never called a racist, and he was never called a criminal. Now, during his campaign, he brought up a lot of questions. Well, not say he brought up, but there were a lot of questions that came up about whether or not he could be a racist because of his own rhetoric. Like, for example, when he was talking about how Mexico is only sending rapists and drug dealers and anybody else who's a criminal. Like, when he said that Mexico is not sending their best, they're sending their worst. But his business dealings? People in the media never questioned it. Another question I have is, would Letitia James be going after Donald Trump had he never been elected president? Had he never even ran for president? Or even maybe if he did run for president, but he lost, like either lost in the general election or he just never won the Republican nomination and then he just slipped back into private life. Would she be going after his business dealings then if he was just a private citizen and never was elected president of the United States? Probably not. People should be questioning this, but they probably won't. You have someone who is about to obtain government power, and she's seeking the changing of laws so she can convict people if they are pardoned by the president. She isn't just going to investigate him either. She's going to investigate his family and anyone else who has been involved with his business life. She's going after his close associates. She's going after his foundation, everything. I think that you could call this targeting and you can make a legitimate argument for it. And think about the kind of precedent this would set. What if other states decided to start doing this? And not just with Donald Trump, but what if attorneys general in other states had decided to do this against any political opponent? No matter how this ends, I don't think it's going to end well. And like we've seen before, any monumental precedent set by one political party always comes back to hurt them later. Staying with New York, the state wants to make some changes to its gun legislation. It wants to change the way that background checks are conducted whenever someone wants to purchase a firearm. And they want the background check to include investigations of social media and internet history. And this is legislation that was introduced not long after the beginning of November. Do you remember the shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh? Well, that happened, I think, November 4th. And this was legislation that was introduced in response to that. This is reactionary legislation. From Newsweek on November 4th, Eric Adams, the president of Brooklyn Borough, and State Senator Kevin Palmer are currently writing the proposed legislation, which would give law enforcement authorities the power to check up to 3 years of an individual's social media accounts and internet search history before they are allowed to buy a gun. The report first came from WCBS Radio 880, and it was cited by Newsweek. A 3-year review of social media profile would give an easy profile of a person who is not suitable to hold and possess a firearm, Adams explained, according to the WCBS report. The Brooklyn leader emphasized that the shooter's social media accounts would have raised serious alarm bells if such checks had been in place. Under existing laws in Pennsylvania, which would not be impacted by a New York policy shift, all the shooter's weapons were bought legally, according to police. And it was reported that the shooter made some social media posts that were directed at the Jewish community in this country. Do you remember whenever Gab.com once again was in the news because, well, Gab.com, it's a social media platform that does not censor any kind of speech. And this guy had made some post on Gab where he had made some comments about the Jews. He even went so far to say that the Jews are controlling President Trump. And then he goes and attacks the synagogue. But regardless of that, I have issues with this. 3 years of internet search history, and not only that, but also access to a private citizen's social media profile. Any social media profile for that matter, since people have multiple social media profiles. Wouldn't that be an invasion of privacy? And not only that, but what would they consider to be grounds for denying someone the right to purchase a firearm? Like, would it be just violent speech, or would this also include any kind of bigoted speech or anything? Like, I'm just wondering if there are so many things that they could use to deny someone. Like, I'll use myself as an example here. I am very fond of dark humor. I know that not everyone is. Then again, dark humor is like food. Not everyone gets it. But there are other people who are also fond of dark humor. For some people, it might be a coping mechanism. Other people, it might just be their sense of humor. But would someone who finds pleasure in dark humor be excluded from the right to buy a gun? And liking dark humor doesn't make someone a bad person. It just means that they might laugh at things that other people might not find to be very funny. Humor isn't universal, and it shouldn't be treated like it is. I don't have faith that the government, any government, would be able to treat these things as if they were a case-by-case basis either. As the website techdirt.com had pointed out after news about this legislation became known, this law would treat every gun buyer as a suspected criminal who may only take advantage of their guaranteed rights by engaging in government-approved speech, and they would do that. Remember, it would be the government conducting these background checks into social media. I don't think people would want to give them that privilege. I really don't think people would want to give them that privilege. And on top of that, this legislation may not even be constitutional, as TechDirt also pointed out. This premise will only make sense to those incapable of giving it more than a superficial examination. First off, gun ownership is constitutionally protected, whether these legislators like it or not. It doesn't make sense to abridge someone's rights over social media post, even if the post contain bigoted speech. That speech is also protected by the Constitution, so combining the two simply doubles the chance the law will be struck down as unconstitutional. Plenty of people engage in ignorant bigotry. Not all of them are would-be criminals. Eric Adams has made the argument that if the police department is reviewing a gang assault, a robbery, some type of shooting, they go and do a social media profile investigation. Okay, yeah, but that's only after a crime has been committed. Are you going to treat simply buying a gun as a crime? And are you going to treat someone who has done nothing wrong as if they were a criminal? That's actually forbidden in this country. You are innocent until proven guilty. And how would this even be executed anyway? Would every potential gun buyer be required to submit all their social media passwords and submit access to their internet search history? Well, that also doesn't happen here. Social media profiles belong solely to the people who have them. That's a violation of the right to privacy. That's government intrusion to the highest degree, if you ask me. There are so many things about this that scream unconstitutional, but elected officials who have a responsibility to uphold the Constitution are seeking to destroy it. Imagine that. Same song, different verse. Well, all these things that we have talked about in this episode today, none of them have actually been made law yet, but they could become laws very soon. And if they do, we'll be talking about them right here on the Liberty Ginger podcast. I would like to thank everyone for listening to episode number 9. Think Liberty podcast, like I said, is a part of the Think Liberty Network. You can find the Think Liberty Network at most places where podcasts are hosted, to include Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, Google Play, and iHeartRadio. And there are many other podcast apps as well where podcasts are hosted. If there is one that you know about where you can't find the Think Liberty Network, but you think that we should be there, let us know. Thank you very much for listening.